I was a journalist working as an independent producer for NBC Nightly News, and I was always in the developing world. And there was, you know, these stories, and I was one of the few females in Afghanistan or Iraq, and so I had stories, really compelling stories to tell, and print was just wasn't a venue that was rich enough. I needed more time. I needed more as a storyteller. I needed more of the story myself. I found Nell because I was writing a story in the sesquicentennial of Idaho, the last 150 years, and I had to research every county to chronologically look at what the history was. And I came across this woman that was wearing, you know, this fantastic, glorious, glamorous Wolf and Hudson Bay Company coat. God, she's like from the front of W, and here she was in 1919 up in the wilderness of Idaho. And when I found out what she was doing, when she was writing, producing, starring in, doing her own stunts, pioneered the first nude scene, and nobody knew who she was. I mean, she had been discovered by Professor Tom TAWC-kie about 20 years ago, and then Kay Armitage, here from Canada, wrote the book. But she still was very obscure, and most people don't know who she is. I felt I owed her a debt. I could not have been doing what I did in Afghanistan or Iraq or you know, Myanmar, if not for a woman like that busting down the walls 100 years ago. The first film that I worked on as associate producer was Ethics for the New Millennium with the Dalai Lama, which was really interesting film, you know, following the Dalai Lama around for 3 months and constantly, you know, having to apologize for cursing in front of him, you know, and he was very cool about it. You know, when you get to hang out with the Dalai Lama and he's saying these things you don't understand, you go, there are just 1,000 stories in the naked city. I have to keep going, and that's how I became a filmmaker. My middle name is Brazen, you know, and that's probably a euphemism for something else, but it starts with a B. But I would say it was when I went into Myanmar. Myanmar is a military dictatorship that's been closed. They had Aung San Suu Kyi in you know, a detention for 28 years. And I met he's the director of tourism, and he obviously thought, well, you know, I was going to be something more than I was, but I was a journalist and I wanted to get into Myanmar. So I said, if you get me a visa into Myanmar as a journalist, my intention was to interview Aung San Suu Kyi. So he did. I flew there. He had a private government jet pick me up in Yangon, flew me to Naypyidaw, which is the jungle sequestered capital. The only other person there was the president of Laos at this one hotel. I went to see him, and I said, the reason I'm here is I want to see Then Shui, who's the president, and I want to interview Aung San Suu Kyi. And he's like, really? And I'm like, yeah, that's really why I'm here, and here I am. So he literally they did not have landlines. This is how backward the country is. He took his cell phone, called up Then Shui's secretary. My driver took me right down there, and I had an hour-long conversation with the president of Myanmar, trying to convince him how transparency and allowing me to interview Aung San Suu Kyi was going to be a benefit to their military dictatorship. But he said, well, come back tomorrow. When I got back to my hotel, there were 25 officers there, and the concierge at the hotel spoke 7 languages, and he was just white. He goes, you were in trouble. And this is a Buddhist country, and of course there were no women in this group of military officers. So they took my passport and put me under house arrest, and they said, do you have any cameras? Now I had 7 cameras with me. No journalists were even supposed to be in this jungle sequestered capital. And so what happened was I said, I have 1 camera. I have 1 camera, because knowing that this is a Buddhist country and they're not going to come into my room without a woman, I went back to my room in this very exclusive hotel, brought out 1 camera, the most complicated camera I had, and my baby at the time was only 6 months old, and I rewound this digital camera back and I said, look, it's just baby pictures. I haven't been taking anything. They confiscated the camera, could not figure out how to use it, could only watch the baby pictures. They stayed with me with the camera. I went back and got my suitcase. They put me on a military jet, flew me back to Yangon, and stayed with me until I got on a commercial jet back to Singapore. So that is the most brazen thing I've ever done. If you're in a situation where being a female is an advantage and you don't compromise who you are as a person, there are advantages to being a female in a man's world. I met a woman named Zainab Salbi. I used to live in San Francisco, that's where I'm from, and she is the founder of Women for Women. She had started the company with just $2,000, her wedding dowry, and she needed somebody to help her. And so I went with her. I went with her to Afghanistan, and it was 3 months after shock and awe. I had my agent call up Oprah magazine, to write this article about going to Afghanistan as a, fiction writer that suddenly changed her life. And this woman changed my life. Her story changed my life. And what happened from there was I met a woman in the refugee camp outside of Kabul, because we had just done shock and awe. And so we were with someone from the agency, Women for Women, who was quite young and had never done this before. And so when we were speaking to this one woman who was a refugee with an interpreter, and they said, well, what do you dream of? And this woman looked at her and she goes, I dream of a drink of water. And I thought, well, now that's a humbling thing. And I thought, there is more to this woman's story. And indeed there was. So we got a camera person. We interviewed her through the interpreter. And during shock and awe, what had happened is we had bombed her village, and she had laid on top of her children. And her 4 children had died, but she survived. And here she was in this refugee camp in a tent that was made of rags, alone, without her children. And so that was when I realized I need to be a filmmaker. I need to tell stories for people who can't speak for themselves. And so that woman in that refugee camp made me a filmmaker. When Harry met Sally, because it just makes me crazy. Doesn't everyone say that? It's kind of like, which one makes you cry? Okay, doesn't everybody say beaches? Or maybe that's like when you go through at the grocery store and you go, oh, no, I'm reading Dostoevsky for the 7th time, but really you're reading the People magazine and National Enquirer all the time. I probably want to speak to Gandhi because I figure he's not going to drink Chardonnay. And I could, much like the Dalai Lama, it would teach me that most of these people are just people, and that one person, indeed, can make a difference in the world. I'm in places where there are often 90% men to 10% female. And the women are always the most compromised in the places where I'm working, because I work in the developing world a lot. That's where my focus has been until the Nell Shipman film. And the truth is, I often find that men can be quite helpful, and women are very competitive because they have a sense of scarcity about what is available to them instead of a sense of camaraderie. One of the things Nell Shipman said was, a good story, you get them in a tree, you throw rocks at them, and then you get them down. Well, as a woman on the planet, basically we're already up a tree. If you learn to dodge the rocks and concentrate on the story, then I think you're fine. And it's my experience that if you focus on the content, people will come. Tell the truth. Tell the truth. Even if you're doing a feature film, look, when you're telling the truth, when your actors are telling the truth, when you're watching a good story, hearing a good story, when it's the truth, your hair stands up on the back of your neck and people know it. And that's what speaks to people. We are our stories. The real problem is when people begin to feel that their story is the only story, and they're covetous of the truth, and they're covered that my story is the most important, whether it's religious or whatever, but we really are just stories. We're on this pale blue dot in the universe, and the stories we make up is who we are from when we were around the campfires, as cave people. And so I would say, yeah, tell the truth. The woman in the refugee camp. The people whose names we don't know. The people who can't tell their stories for themselves but keep going. The incredible aid workers that I see in the developing world. I did one film, Between the Earth and Sky, about these young medical students in South Sudan, and they have 10 million people and less than 50 doctors in the whole country, and they're out trying to become doctors on their own, scratching their lessons in the dirt. Those are the people I look up to. If your house was burning down, what would you take? And he said, I would take the fire. And that's what I think we have to do as storytellers, as filmmakers, as actors, as human beings. We have to take the fire, we have to pass it forward. That's our life.